A dog began barking frantically when a pregnant woman appeared at the airport, and no one understood why, until an envelope on the ground revealed a secret buried for decades. When the police finally uncovered the truth, it was already too late. What was about to be born wasn't just a child, but the rebirth of something the world had tried to forget. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Sometimes what you carry isn't held in your arms, but hidden in your past. At Terminal C in Riverbend Airport in Ohio, the usual hum of announcements and the clatter of rolling suitcases felt heavier on that grey March morning. Officer Carter Steele, a veteran of airport security, kept a sharp eye on his sidekick, Rex, a Belgian Malinois with an almost uncanny sense of smell and a restless nature. For 7 long years, Carter had relied on Rex's instincts more than any other partner on the job, but today something in the dog's behavior was off. Then she arrived, a tall blonde woman making her way slowly through the crowd, carefully balancing 2 paper bags in her hands, her swollen belly pressed against a crisp white blouse beneath a dark navy coat, clearly well into her final trimester. Her name was Tara Rivers, and everything about her looked meticulously arranged. Oversized sunglasses too dark for an indoor setting, comfortable flats chosen for ease, and a face that seemed too serene for a place filled with farewells and lost hopes. The moment Rex laid his eyes on her, everything changed. He went rigid, then let out a deep growl followed by a sharp, insistent bark, not out of anger, but as a warning. Carter tightened the leash, trying to steady Rex, whose back arched and muscles tensed as if preparing to leap. He'd never reacted this way toward expectant women before. Yet Tara didn't flinch or stop, but behind those dark lenses, her eyes remained fixed on Rex with an eerie intensity, not out of fear or confusion, but almost as if she recognized the reason behind his alarm. "Hold on a minute," Carter called out firmly but politely. Tara paused, took 2 more steps forward, and suddenly collapsed. The sound of her body hitting the floor was like a thunderclap. Her bags burst open, spilling papers, small bottles, a sealed envelope, and even a tiny plush bear across the cold floor. The people around her froze, as if time itself had paused. Carter dropped to her side and immediately radioed for medical assistance, while Rex continued barking, not in anger now, but in a state of panic, as if trying to convey something no one could decipher. That's when Carter noticed the envelope lying near her hand, now slightly crumpled and stained. In shaky, deliberate cursive, a single word was scrawled on it: "Sorry." It wasn't merely a letter, it was a warning. In that moment, as the distant sound of sirens grew louder, Carter felt a sinking dread. This woman, and whatever secret she was burdened with, wasn't meant to have made it to this airport. It was far too late already. Some things, he thought, are meant to remain buried. The paramedics arrived within minutes, though to Carter it felt like an eternity. Tara lay unconscious, her breathing shallow and skin as pale as the cold tile floor. A thin bead of sweat trickled down her temple. Rex, having finally ceased his barking, now sat motionless by her side, his ears low and eyes fixed on her face, as though guarding a mystery only he could understand. As one EMT checked her pulse, Carter noticed her left hand clutching something tightly, a necklace, but this wasn't an ordinary piece of jewelry. It was a weathered military tag, scratched and aged, bearing a name he hadn't heard in over 2 decades. Carter froze. The name, Preston, hit him like a punch, flooding him with memories of uniforms, scorching deserts, and gunfire echoing. In a distant land, Preston wasn't just a name, he was someone Carter had desperately tried to forget. That tag should have been laid to rest long ago with its owner. So why was it now clutched in the hand of a stranger he'd never seen before? As an EMT read aloud from Tara's identification, clipping it to the stretcher, Carter's mind raced. Envelope, necklace, that long-forgotten name. Nothing was adding up. Without a word, he picked up the sealed envelope she had dropped and slipped it into his coat pocket, perhaps guided by instinct, perhaps burdened by guilt, or maybe because whatever was inside was not meant for just anyone. As the gurney wheeled away, Rex began whining softly, a behavior he'd never shown before. Carter knelt beside him, gripping his collar gently. "You know something, don't you, Rex?" he murmured. The dog let out a soft, broken whimper, the same sound Carter had heard only once before, on the day when Preston never came back from the station. Later, in the staff office, Carter stared at the envelope under harsh fluorescent light. The handwriting was unmistakable. It wasn't Tara's. It was Preston's, slanted, rushed, and all in uppercase, just like he used to write when under pressure. But Preston was dead. His funeral had been held, his coffin sealed. So, how could this letter exist now in the year 2025? Carter slumped into a metal chair, the noise echoing in an empty break room. Slowly, he reached into his coat and opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single page, its edges yellowed with age. He unfolded it carefully. The first line read, "If you're reading this, it means I failed to keep my promise. Some ghosts don't haunt, they guide." Carter read the line again, slower this time. "If you're reading this, it means I failed to keep my promise." His heart pounded as though trying to push away the terrible truth. The remainder of the letter was written in the same frantic tone, half confession, half warning. Preston wrote about meeting someone during their last deployment in Kandahar, a woman named Nina, a civilian translator with a secret he had sworn to keep until his dying day. She carried more than just her past. The letter continued, "And I was carrying more than just gear." Carter's thoughts flashed back to Nina, whom he barely remembered, a quiet figure always lingering in the background, never too close to the soldiers. Yet Preston had seen her in a different light. Now, over 22 years later, a woman named Tara Rivers had collapsed in an airport, holding Preston's military tag and his letter. The connection was horrifying, but it made sense. If Nina had been pregnant when Preston died, Tara could be the child. But if that were true, why was she here? Why now? Carter's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Officer Dylan Keene, his young but determined partner, stepped inside with a tight expression. "She's asking for you," Dylan said. Slowly, Carter folded the letter and slid it back into his coat pocket. The chill in his spine had nothing to do with the cold air. "What's her condition?" he asked, stable but confused, and she mentioned your name specifically. Carter couldn't recall ever meeting Tara before that day, yet something about Rex's reaction and her insistence on finding him couldn't be a coincidence. He followed Dylan down the sterile hallway toward the airport clinic, where she had been stabilized. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed loudly, and every step toward her door felt like venturing into a chapter of his past he had hoped would remain closed. Outside the room, through a glass window, he saw her sitting upright, pale, with dry lips and hands fidgeting with a hospital blanket. She appeared younger now, vulnerable, barely holding herself together. When their eyes met for a brief moment, he saw hints of Preston in her expression, the same set of eyes and an unspoken weight of truth. She mouthed a word, neither a greeting nor a name, but a question. "Do you know who I am?" One could hide a secret for decades until it finally stares you down. Carter stepped into the room, the silence thick around him. Tara didn't speak immediately. Her hands clenched the blanket so tightly her knuckles went white. Her eyes, however, stayed locked on his, as if searching for someone familiar. "You knew him, didn't you?" she asked in a rough, steady tone. "Preston," she mumbled, almost too softly to be heard. Carter hesitated, unable to voice the truth. "I served with him," he finally said, his voice low. "We were in the same unit until our last deployment." She nodded, as if confirming a secret only she could see, and added, "He wrote about you," her eyes filling with unshed tears that refused to fall. "He said you were the only one he trusted, that if something happened to him, you'd know what to do." Carter's throat tightened. He didn't feel he deserved that kind of trust. Not after the decisions he'd made, not after the way Preston had died. Then Tara reached beneath her pillow and pulled out another letter, worn, creased, almost falling apart. "He wrote this to me before I was born. My mother kept it hidden my entire life. She said it was too dangerous and would only bring pain," she explained in a trembling voice as she handed it over. Carter took it, feeling its weight as though it were lined with lead. He didn't open it. Not yet. Not until he understood everything. "I only found it after she passed," Tara continued. "A few weeks ago, things started happening. People began watching me, following me. Someone even tried to break into my apartment. They didn't take anything. They just searched, as if looking for something specific." Her voice broke, and she pressed her hand protectively against her belly. "That's why I came here. To find you, to figure out who he really was, and why someone still wants whatever he left behind." Carter slowly sat down on a chair beside her bed, the letter resting on his knee, as if it might burst into flames at any moment. "There were things Preston never told anyone," he murmured, "not even me. But if someone's still after his secrets, it means whatever he buried hasn't stayed buried." Tara turned her head, staring blankly at the wall. "Now, I'm the one holding it," she whispered. Carter didn't correct her. Deep down, they both understood that she wasn't just talking about the baby. Some things are stolen to protect the world, and others to safeguard a soul. That night, back in his apartment, Carter sat alone with Tara's unopened letter still lying on the table. The lamp cast a dull yellow light over the paper, making the words, "To my daughter if I'm gone," look even heavier. Rex lay at his feet, his ears twitching and eyes half open in a state of alert even in sleep. The atmosphere was thick with memories and guilt, remnants of that final mission with Preston, secrets that were never meant to be known. Finally, Carter opened the letter. Preston's shaky, rushed handwriting spilled across the page like a man trying to outrun time. He described hidden government files, secret documents, and a flash drive recovered during a covert operation, a mission that never appeared in any official report. "They told us they found weapons," the letter read, "but what I saw wasn't meant for the battlefield. It was personal information, names, coordinates, and something else, something they'd kill for." Carter's stomach sank as he recalled that mission. The night when Preston disappeared for nearly 4 hours, returning with blood on his shirt and terror in his eyes. He had never explained or told anyone what he had done. He'd merely handed off a sealed satchel to someone from a secret agency and pretended it never happened. And now that satchel's contents had likely never reached their destination, or worse, they had, and someone was desperate to get them back. A sudden knock on the door snapped him out of his spiral. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks sounded. Rex sprang up, growling low. Carter cautiously approached the door, his gun drawn. He opened it just a crack to see an empty corridor, but something was taped to the door, a grainy black and white photograph showing a visibly pregnant woman waiting at a bus stop. On the back, a single typed message read, "You're not the only one who got the letter." Carter's blood ran cold. It wasn't only about Tara anymore. Someone else had received the same warning, the same vital information, and they were watching her. This meant she wasn't safe. Not at the airport, not in the clinic, nowhere. "Get your vest," he muttered to Rex. "We're going back. Whatever Preston took, Tara is the key to finding it," he added. "And someone out there wants her silenced before she even knows what's happening." Sometimes your arrival is predicted long before you pack your bags. By the time Carter got back to the airport clinic, it was just past midnight. The halls were quiet, most travelers long gone, replaced by janitors and overnight staff who barely glanced at him. Yet something in the air felt off. Rex led the way with purpose, his nose twitching, ears forward. The clinic doors were open, a glaring red flag since security never left those rooms unlocked after hours. Carter reached for his badge and slowly pushed the door open. The lights were off, there was no one at the reception desk, and Tara's room was empty. Her blanket, folded neatly on a chair, and a plastic cup of water untouched on the nightstand. That didn't add up. She wouldn't have left without alerting someone, not after their conversation. Looking around, Carter noticed Rex fixated on the air vent, sniffing furiously before he growled deeply, almost angrily. Someone had been there recently, and whoever it was didn't want Tara to stay. Then Carter's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He answered. For 3 long seconds, silence reigned before a distorted male voice spoke in a calculated tone. "She's safer with us than with you, Officer Steele. Stay out of this. You've already let her down as a father. Don't let her down now." The line went dead. Carter stood frozen, his hands clenched around the phone as the room felt even colder. Whoever had taken her knew all about him, about Preston and about the past. And they weren't mere street thugs. This was a coordinated, precise operation. He replayed the message in his mind. "You've already let her down as a father." Guilt sank in deeper, but so did anger. He hadn't been able to save Preston, but he wasn't about to lose Tara too. Back at the security headquarters, Carter pulled up the footage from the clinic corridor. There it was, at 11:46 at night, 2 men dressed as paramedics wheeling a gurney with Tara, unconscious and strapped in without any resistance. They even nodded politely at the night staff. Their credentials looked fake, their uniforms genuine, and within less than 90 seconds, they were gone. Carter paused the video and zoomed in on a small patch on the gurney bag, barely visible. A patch with the word Ryan, a name from a past Carter had hoped was buried, a name tied to covert operations that he was instructed never to mention. Staring at the screen with a clenched jaw and a racing heart, he realized they hadn't just predicted her arrival, they were waiting for her. Some files are never meant to be opened, unless you are the one they were meant for. Later that evening, in the dim light of his kitchen, Carter sat with a steaming mug of black coffee that had gone cold on the table. Rex rested by the door, alert, as always, yet the name Black Nova echoed in Carter's mind like a curse. Black Nova had once been a secretive Black Ops cell, a shadow operation that technically didn't exist on paper, born out of a post-9/11 intelligence initiative that was publicly dissolved in 2011, but was rumored to still operate undercover. Preston had once whispered about them during a patrol in Helmand. They don't extract people, they erase them. Carter needed answers, and he knew just one person who might still have the off-the-record files. Avery Lane, a conspiracy buff and former NSA analyst who had gone rogue years ago. Avery lived off the grid in an old trailer in the hills outside Columbus. Carter hadn't seen him in over a decade, but if anyone still had dirt on Black Nova, it would be Avery. Driving through the night, Carter kept replaying the footage in his head, the calm precision of the fake medics, the patch, the hidden message. They hadn't been improvising. They were executing a plan that had likely been in place for years. If Preston had left behind something powerful enough to awaken our past, it wasn't just a list of names. It was proof of something that someone would kill to keep secret. Avery's trailer looked like something out of a science fiction flick. with solar panels, tangled wires dangling from satellite dishes, and a sign on the door reading, "Smile, you're already compromised." When Avery opened the door, barefoot in a t-shirt that read, "I don't trust myself either," he didn't even flinch at the sight of Rex or Carter. "I told you this day would come," he muttered. "I've got 2 backups of the Ghost file, but if you're here, it means one of them is already active." Carter raised an eyebrow. "You knew about Preston." Avery grinned grimly. "I tracked the operation, the asset extraction gone wrong, the sudden comm blackout. That wasn't just a mission, it was a cover-up. And your friend wasn't just a soldier. He was the last man standing between that file and the world." Inside Avery's trailer, he booted up an encrypted hard drive and pulled up a folder marked with a skull icon. The screen flickered before revealing a single video file. "This is what they buried," Avery whispered, "and what they'll kill to bury again." Carter leaned in. The screen showed a dim interrogation room where a shadowy figure sat across from a man bound to a chair, bruised and barely conscious. Tara's eyes, Preston's face, and a voice off-camera commanded, "Tell us where you were hit, or a child disappears. Some rescues aren't planned, they're built on regret." The grainy footage played repeatedly in Carter's mind as he drove back toward Riverbend Airport. Preston, battered and broken, had refused to reveal the location of what they wanted. The unseen interrogator never showed his face, only his cold, commanding voice. But what haunted Carter most wasn't the violence. It was when Preston looked up and whispered, "She's innocent, don't ever touch her." That single phrase told him all he needed to know. Preston had planned for this. He knew they wouldn't come for him. They'd come for his daughter. Carter had seen enough covert operations to recognize the signs. What had resurfaced now wasn't just an old memory. It was a rebuilt protocol. Tara's presence, pregnant, vulnerable, desperate for answers, had triggered something deep within the system, something without a name. Now she was in their grasp, and they believed that either something was still inside her, or she was the key to uncovering what Preston had hidden 2 decades ago. Back at the airport security hub, Carter used his contacts to access closed flight logs, surveillance records, and vehicle exit data from the past 6 hours. He tracked the van that had taken Tara to an abandoned military warehouse 14 miles outside the city. It was registered under a fake logistics company called Curus Solutions, which, according to Avery, had links to Black Nova funding back in the early 2000s. Everything was aligning. The trap was set, and Tara was right at its center. He couldn't go through official channels, not with Black Nova involved, who might have moles even inside law enforcement. Instead, he went underground. He pulled out the old burner phone he had vowed never to use again, dialed a number, and after 2 rings, a familiar voice answered. "I didn't expect to hear from you, Malone," said Samantha Fox, a former recon specialist turned ghost operative who owed him her life. "I need an extraction," he said. "One high-risk target, immediate." Samantha didn't ask questions. "Send me the coordinates. I'll bring the silence," she replied. Carter ended the call and looked down at Rex, who sat alert, as if sensing what was coming. "Ready for one more, boy?" he asked. Rex's tail thumped once, then again, enough to answer him. Carter loaded his weapon and secured the hard drive with the footage in a locked case. The words from Preston's letter echoed in his mind. "If you find her, protect her, even from the truth." Strapping on his vest, checking his watch and whispering, "Time's up, Preston. I'm getting her out." Carter set off, knowing that sometimes you don't realize how dark the world is until the door closes behind you. The warehouse loomed in the distance like a silent giant. Carter parked 2 blocks away under an overpass, the city lights barely touching the rusted building. Minutes later, Samantha arrived dressed in sleek black tactical gear, her eyes hidden behind infrared goggles. Without wasting time on pleasantries, she nodded toward the building. There are 2 guards at the back door. The third one smokes every 18 minutes by the generator. We'll get in on his next break, she said. Carter nodded, impressed by her unyielding focus. He could feel the tension in his chest. This wasn't just another job. Tara was inside. In silence, they moved through the shadows. Rex led the way, his movements smooth and precise. At exactly 2:13 in the morning, as the third guard lit a cigarette just as Samantha had predicted, they slipped through a side panel that had been pried open long ago and forgotten by whoever last checked it. Inside, the air reeked of oil, metal, and something older. Decay. Narrow corridors, lined with unmarked crates, passed by under Carter's flashlight, revealing only dust and locks. Then they heard it, a faint, weak female voice. Following the sound along a winding path, they reached a locked room with a small window. Inside, Tara sat cuffed to a chair. Her hair was matted, her lips cracked, but the moment she saw him, her eyes lit up. Carter's heart clenched as she tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. Samantha began picking the lock, but Rex growled low, signaling danger. "Hold on," Carter said softly as he turned from the shadows. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind them. 2 armed men appeared. One carried a silencer, the other a stun baton. "Step away from the door," the taller one ordered in a rehearsed, calm tone. Carter didn't hesitate. In one swift move, Samantha knocked the first guard down with a shot to his leg, while Rex lunged at the second, disarming him of the baton. Carter tackled the taller man, slamming him against a crate. The fight was brief but brutal, and within seconds, both guards lay subdued. The silence in the warehouse returned, heavier than before. They freed Tara, who tried to sit up, her voice cracking as she mumbled, "They kept asking about a code. Something my father gave me. I don't know what it means." Carter helped her to stand. "You do," he whispered gently. "You just don't realize it yet." As they moved toward the exit, Samantha covered the rear. Unnoticed by the group, a security monitor in a dark room flickered to life, showing a camera feed. Behind it, a silver-haired woman with a cold stare leaned forward and said softly, "She's awake," before adding, "Let them run. We're just getting started." Some answers aren't found among the living. They echo from those who stayed silent too long. Later, in a quiet motel room that felt unnaturally still, Tara sat on the edge of the bed with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her fingers traced the outline of the dog tag still hanging from her neck. Carter stood near the window, watching the rain stream down the glass. Samantha slept in a chair, one eye half open. Rex lay curled at Tara's feet, his breathing slow and steady. The warehouse raid had taken its toll on all of them, both physically and emotionally, but the real weight came from the unanswered questions. "I don't remember you ever talking about him," Tara whispered. "My mother, Nina, kept everything locked away. Literally, she had a wooden box with a broken latch that I was never allowed to touch." Carter looked at her intently. "Do you still have it?" he asked. Tara nodded. "It's at my apartment. They tore the place apart, but I doubt they found it. I hid it inside an old piano, the kind nobody thinks works anymore." Her voice wavered in the typical way that betrayed her inner turmoil. The next morning, with new identities and in an unmarked car provided by Samantha's contacts, they headed to Tara's apartment. The building had been cordoned off with tape, but Carter knew how to maneuver around it. Inside, it was even worse than expected. Drawers upturned, picture frames smashed. Yet the piano remained untouched, hidden in plain sight. Tara lifted its lid, revealing an old wooden box inside. She opened it slowly, as though unsealing a tomb. Inside were faded black and white photographs of Nina laughing alongside Preston by a military jeep, documents written in a foreign script, a worn cassette tape labeled "Only When You're Ready," and finally, a small velvet, a pouch containing an ornate brass key with the number 0471 etched on its side. Tara stared at it as if it were radioactive. "I've seen this number before," she murmured, while glancing at a map of Arlington in her handwriting. Carter's eyes narrowed. "That's not just a key, it's a location, a safe deposit box." Back at the motel, they listened to the cassette. Nina's voice, older and slower than Tara remembered, spoke deliberately. "If you're hearing this, it means you're in danger. And I'm sorry I tried to shield you from him, from them, from the truth. But you were always meant to find your way back. You were born too." Tara's hands trembled. "I never told you what they did to Preston or to me. But what's in that box doesn't belong solely to them. It belongs to you, and they'll do anything to keep it hidden." Outside, the rain had turned into thunder, and lightning illuminated the sky for a single second. In that flash, through the motel window, Carter saw a shadow, a figure watching. He immediately stood up. "They found us," Samantha said as she opened her eyes, while Rex growled softly. Tara whispered, almost in disbelief, "It was never about the file, it was about me." Some truths just can't be confined in a box. They shatter everything around them. On the train to Arlington, the rhythmic clatter on the tracks was barely audible under the weight of their mission. Tara sat between Carter and Samantha, clutching the key tightly as if it were a lifeline. Rex lay silently under the seat, unusually still, as if sensing the gravity of their destination. No one spoke much. The air was heavy with anticipation, fear, and questions without easy answers. For Carter, the silence was like a battlefield. He could feel an internal war returning, not one fought with weapons, but with memories. They arrived just past noon, under a grey sky that matched the stone streets and imposing federal buildings of the historic district. The bank was ancient, built of granite with brass doors and guards, who seemed more ceremonial than protective. Inside, a receptionist barely glanced up from her computer until she saw the key. Her face changed instantly to one of alarm, and she called for the manager without a word. Moments later, a man in a sharp navy suit introduced himself as Mr. Grant. He led them along a long corridor, past rows of steel deposit boxes. "Box 0471, he announced, stopping before a vault with dual locks. "This box hasn't been opened in over 20 years. The account was sealed at the request of Miss Nina Fee Rivers. You must be her designated heir." Tara nodded steadily. "I am." Mr. Grant inserted his master key and Tara inserted hers. Together, the locks clicked and the heavy drawer groaned open. Inside, there was nothing but a thick manila envelope labeled "Eyes Only" and a small antique pocket watch that still ticked steadily. Tara picked up the envelope first and then opened it. Inside were classified documents marked with military. Seals, some in English, others in a foreign language, photographs of men in uniform, maps with red lines drawn over desert terrain, and one image that made Carter step back, a younger version of himself and Preston standing in front of a base, with a barely visible woman in the background, Nina. Beneath the papers lay something else, a DNA report sealed in plastic, with the name Tara Rivers at the top and a line highlighted in yellow. "Anomalous genetic markers detected. Subject matches Project Helix profile." Samantha narrowed her eyes. Project Helix, that's top-level Black Ops biotech. DARPA started it in the 90s and shut it down when too many assets went missing. Carter's stomach churned. "You're saying she was part of a program?" he asked. "No," Samantha replied quietly. "I'm saying she might be the result of one." Tara stared at the report in her hand, her breath coming shallowly. The truth was no longer hidden. Her mother hadn't just tried to protect her from others. She had been protecting her from herself. And now, as the old pocket watch ticked away in the silence, the past and future collided. "Whoever I am," Tara whispered, "they knew long before I was born." Carter looked at her and then at the folder. "They're not going to stop now," he said. "You don't need a uniform to be a weapon. Sometimes just being born is enough." Later, in a secure safe house provided by Samantha, a rundown ranger station deep in the West Virginia woods, the team spread out the documents on a large table: maps, charts, coded memos, and above all, the Helix files. Samantha worked quickly, scanning each page with military-like precision. Carter stood by a window with his arms crossed, while Tara sat silently, the DNA report resting in her lap. The truth was starting to emerge, but it was far more dangerous than any of them had expected. Project Helix wasn't just about gene research, Samantha finally said, holding up a faded document. It was an off-the-record operation designed to identify and manipulate inherited advantages: intelligence, strength, memory, even psychological resilience. They weren't trying to create super soldiers, they were trying to breed them. Carter's voice was low as he added, "They used selective pairing, controlled environments, and monitored subjects from birth." Samantha nodded. "According to this, Nina volunteered, or perhaps was targeted, because she had genetic markers they deemed ideal." Carter glanced at Tara and then at the folder. "Preston wasn't just your father," Samantha replied gently. "He was your handler, your protector, your warning system." Tears welled in Tara's eyes, but she did not cry. "So my whole life was planned?" she asked softly. "Not exactly everything," Carter said gently, "but someone did plan what you might become. That doesn't mean they get to decide who you truly are." Tara shook her head. "Then why do I feel like something's shifting inside me?" Samantha looked up sharply. "What do you mean by shifting?" Tara hesitated before saying, "Lately I've been remembering things I never lived, places I've never been. I can even hear voices, not just thoughts, but actual echoes, memories that aren't mine." The room fell silent. Samantha pulled out a page from the bottom of the folder, a psychological evaluation labeled Subject 6A. The report described shared memory imprints, heightened perception, and a deep connection to biological instincts, especially with dogs. She glanced at Rex, who had not left Tara's side since she entered. He reacted to her faster than he did to Carter, almost as if he was reading her mind. "She's not just carrying traits," Samantha said slowly. "She's carrying access. They engineered her to receive something." Carter's face went pale. "That's why they didn't kill her. They needed her mind to stay awake." Tara looked from the DNA report to the room and whispered, "So what happens when I fully wake?" Up, no one had an answer. Outside, in the cold wind of the forest, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was the calm before a storm. They hadn't just created her to survive, they built her to activate. In the middle of the night, drenched in sweat and with her heart pounding, as if trying to break free, Tara woke up. At first she assumed it was just another nightmare, but there was no dream. Only a surge of heat, followed by an overwhelming silence that rang in her ears. Slowly she sat up on the edge of a cot, hands trembling. The cabin was dark, lit only by the fading glow of the fireplace. Carter was asleep on the couch, Samantha by the door, and Rex snoring softly at her feet. Everything was still, yet her senses were sharper than ever. She could hear the hum of electricity in the walls, the steady rhythm of Samantha's breathing, and even the faint crackle of the wood in the fireplace. As she stood, her body felt lighter yet stronger, as if gravity had been rebalanced around her. She walked to a small mirror by the sink and stared at her reflection. The same face, the same eyes, but somehow deeper, sharper, as if someone had just adjusted a camera's focus so that everything came into clear view. Carter stirred the moment she moved. He blinked, reached for his sidearm, then stopped when he saw her standing calmly in the dim light, almost glowing from the mix of sweat and firelight. "Tara?" he asked softly. She slowly turned toward him as if weighing his words. "I saw them," she whispered. "I don't know how, but I saw the lab, the white walls, my mother and others. There were other women and children too. I knew them, though I'd never met them." Samantha immediately sat up. "You're having a memory recall," she explained. "That's not just adrenaline. It's like you're unlocking long-hidden data that your conscious mind never had access to." Tara looked down at her hands. "I don't feel like I'm breaking down," she said. "It feels more like I'm starting to come together." Rex let out a deep, low growl, not of warning, but as a response, as if something inside him recognized the change. The connection between him and Tara had always been strong, but now it was almost instinctive. Suddenly, a soft beep came from a laptop on the table. Samantha was already on her feet and walked over. The laptop wasn't connected to anything, yet its light blinked steadily like a heartbeat. The screen lit up, showing a black window with one line of text: "Helix Protocol, Phase 2, Activation Verified." The words pulsed once, then disappeared, sending a chill through the room. "They knew this day would come," Carter murmured. "They were waiting for you to switch on." Tara backed away from the screen, her voice barely audible. "I didn't press anything. It just happened." Samantha closed the laptop and locked it down. "It was never about external control," she said. "The protocol is inside you now." She then looked at Carter. "You can't run from your creators, not when they built you to seek them out." The silence that followed was louder than any alarm. Tara could feel something shifting inside her, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, even spiritually. She wasn't just changing, she was connecting to something bigger. Carter knew their window was closing fast. With the Helix Protocol activated, the people behind it, the ones who built it, would soon be on high alert. They already knew she existed and that she was awake, and they would come for her. Samantha had traced a name from the documents found. In the safe deposit box, Dr. Victor Slate, a former DARPA geneticist who was officially declared dead in 2012 after a mysterious lab accident. But encrypted financial records told a different story. He was still receiving funds through a shell company based in Arizona. "He isn't dead," Samantha confirmed. "He simply vanished behind the proper paperwork." Tara stared at the screen. "If he helped create me, then he owes me the truth." The location was disguised as a rehabilitation center in the middle of the Arizona desert, isolated, silent, surrounded by sand and shadows. Yet the surveillance feeds painted a different picture: armed guards, unmarked vehicles, thermal sensors, and reinforced entryways. "This isn't a rehab center," Carter said. "It's a bunker." Samantha nodded, already unpacking their gear. "We'll move in like it's a fortress." They breached the facility just after midnight, using an old maintenance shaft. Avery had discovered buried in a decades-old blueprint. Inside, the air was cold, sterile, and heavy with a sense of ancient secrets. The walls were concrete, and the lighting was minimal. After navigating narrow corridors and bypassing various security traps, they found a hidden lab on a lower level. Standing inside, as if he had been expecting them, was a man with gray hair and hollow eyes. He didn't run or panic. He merely raised his hands, slowly. "You're early," he said softly as he looked at Tara. The protocol was triggered. "And too soon." Carter stepped forward, gun drawn. "Are you Dr. Slate?" he demanded. "I was," the man replied, "but now I'm just the last one who remembers how you were made." Tara stepped closer, her voice trembling yet determined. "Then tell me, why my mother? Why me?" Dr. Slate exhaled slowly. Because you had the purest markers and you were our only success, the quiet answer to a question the world never even asked. Samantha's voice was sharp. What question? Dr. Slate looked at her, then back at Tara. Helix wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. You're a prototype, the only one who survived the process. Before anyone could react, an explosion shook the entire facility. Red lights flashed, sirens blared, and the security system announced a breach. Dr. Slate gave a bitter smile. You wanted the truth, he said, and now they'll make sure you never leave with it. They built you to be a secret. Now you're their biggest liability. The hallway erupted in red light and deafening sirens as dust fell from the ceiling, and metal doors slammed shut one after another, cutting off all escape routes. Samantha grabbed Tara's arm and pulled her back into the lab. They're sealing the exits. We have 90 seconds max, she warned. Carter locked eyes with Dr. Slate. You're coming with us, he ordered, but Dr. Slate remained still, his face ashen. I was never meant to leave this place, he murmured. Tara looked around, her breathing quick, but her mind unnervingly calm. Memories flashed through her mind. The blueprints of the compound, the hidden maintenance shafts, the generator. Rooms. She wasn't just remembering, she was accessing knowledge that had never been taught. There's a tunnel beneath Lab 3, she said suddenly. It leads to the old cooling chambers. Samantha stared at her. How do you know that? I don't know, Tara whispered, but I do. They moved quickly, Carter taking point, Samantha covering the rear, and Tara guiding them through the concrete maze. Rex stayed close by her side, moving with sharp, instinctive precision. Every corner they turned, Tara was one step ahead, predicting camera angles, motion sensors, even guard patrols. It wasn't luck. It was as if she was coded to survive. Eventually they reached a sealed bulkhead near the base of the lab. The door had been welded shut years ago. Samantha muttered, "Not anymore." Tara placed her hand on the panel, and, with a hiss, the lock released, opening the tunnel. Beyond, the passage was narrow, cold, and filled with the low hum of forgotten machines. As they moved on, Carter turned to Tara. That was pure muscle memory, almost like old programming. He said, I think my mother hid more than just a box in that piano. She hid knowledge, maybe even an entire set of instincts. Samantha glanced back. You're not merely remembering this place, she said. You were designed to escape it. Suddenly, footsteps thundered down the corridor. Black Nova operatives, fully armed and moving fast. Gunfire echoed as they reached the tunnel's edge. Carter fired his weapon, covering the group as they advanced. A bullet ricocheted, narrowly missing Tara's head. Rex roared and lunged, knocking one soldier down in the chaos. Carter tossed a flash grenade into the hallway, buying them precious seconds. They emerged from the tunnel into a dry ravine behind. The facility, where a backup van, provided by Samantha's contacts, waited. The vehicle sped off into the desert night as Tara clutched the antique pocket watch from the vault, its ticking steady in her hand. What now? She asked, her voice shaking for the first time. Carter looked at her, his eyes steely. We stop running and start hunting. Samantha agreed. Because whoever built this program didn't create you by accident, she said, glancing at the dark horizon. If you were the only one, why do the files list more names? Their safe house in rural New Hampshire was too quiet, an eerie silence that felt anything but peaceful. Inside a modest cabin, Tara sat cross-legged on the floor, sifting through documents taken from Dr. Slate's lab. Pages, photos, and tapes with cryptic codes were strewn about. Carter leaned against the doorframe, watching her closely, while Samantha scribbled notes at the dining table, trying to piece together a timeline from the fragments. It was Tara who discovered a folded page tucked into an old manual. No title, no explanation, just a list of names, each preceded by the designation 6A. The names glowed against the dim light. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered, "but I'm not." Carter stepped closer and examined the list over her shoulder. There were 5 names in total. Tara's name was the last. "These aren't just files," he said softly. "They're identities, subjects." Tara pointed at the second name, Ethan Ward. "I've seen him in my dreams, a boy running in the snow. I thought it was just my imagination." Samantha looked up sharply. "It's not imagination, it's neurological. You're somehow connected, genetically or cognitively. You're even picking up signals, like a shared memory, maybe even an instinctual communication." Tara's voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. "They didn't just make us, they linked us." Later that night, Samantha decrypted a flash drive found among the papers. A blinking map appeared, with 5 red markers scattered across the United States. Each marker matched a name from the list. "These aren't just identities," Samantha said. "They're locations, dormant subjects, probably still unaware." Carter leaned in, and Tara's eyes reflected the map. "If I get triggered, they could all be in danger," he murmured. Samantha nodded grimly. "And if they awaken, they won't know who to trust," Carter added, "which makes them vulnerable or deadly." Tara walked to a small table where the antique pocket watch still ticked steadily. She picked it up, feeling its rhythmic pulse in her palm. "There's something about this watch," she said softly. "Something that keeps showing up in my dreams. It's more than just sentimental. It might be used to time something." Samantha glanced at the network code scribbled on the bottom of Tara's DNA report. "That sequence matches part of the signal," she observed. "The watch might be tuned to that beacon." Carter looked between the two. "Are you saying you can track them?" "No," Tara answered quietly, "but I can feel them." As the team planned their next move, the map blinked again. One of the red markers shifted slightly, located in the snowy forests of Oregon. A teenage boy bolted upright in bed, his nose bleeding and breath shallow. He looked at the sky as if someone had just called his name, wiped the blood away with trembling hands and whispered, "Tara." He didn't know her name, but somehow he had always been waiting for her. The forgotten town of Silver Pines, Oregon, surrounded by dense forests and blanketed in snow most of the year, Ethan Ward had spent his entire life. Raised by a reclusive, retired military contractor who claimed to be his uncle, Ethan's childhood was filled with unanswered questions. Whenever he asked about his parents, the answer was always the same: they were lost in service. But Ethan never fully believed that story. Late at night, he would hear voices in his dreams, and sometimes he saw her, a girl with blonde hair and dark eyes, strong yet frightened. Sometimes she appeared in a lab, other times she was running. Every morning, when he woke from these dreams, his hands would shake, his chest would ache, and his nose would bleed. Eventually, he stopped asking his uncle altogether. The last time he mentioned it, his uncle had burned a photograph, a drawing, of the girl's face with the words, "You weren't made to remember." That sentence haunted him more than the dreams ever did. Then, one morning after the strongest dream yet, Ethan felt something different, as if a switch had been flipped. The girl had whispered a name, Tara. When he awoke, the old clock in the hallway, untouched for years, had started ticking again. He didn't understand why, but it scared him more than the dream itself. He went down to the basement where an old chest, always forbidden by his uncle, sat. Something inside urged him that now was the time. He opened the chest and discovered dozens of medical files, some with his name, others marked with codes like 6A02. One file showed a picture of him at the age of 5, hooked up to machines. Another detailed his blood under a microscope, labeled Helix Adaptive. Subject Ward. His hands trembled as he realized he wasn't adopted or orphaned. He had been engineered, trained, and monitored his whole life. And now, the walls that had kept him contained were starting to crumble. At that moment, he heard tires crunching on snow outside. His uncle had returned early. Ethan quickly shoved the files into his backpack and escaped through the back window, not knowing where he was headed, but feeling an irresistible pull eastward. The name Tara echoed in his head like a beacon, though he didn't know her. Personally, deep down he believed she was the only one who could reveal his true identity. That very night, in a quiet cabin in New Hampshire, Tara sat by a crackling fire, clutching a map dotted with 5 blinking points. One of the markers had just shifted. Her eyes opened wide as she whispered, "He's awake." Carter looked up from a table where he had been poring over files. "Ethan?" he asked. Tara nodded slowly. "He's on the move." Samantha stepped in from outside, her boots covered in snow. "We need to find him before they do," she said. "Some connections aren't random. They're woven into your blood." The snow fell heavily as the team crossed state lines in a modified black SUV that avoided surveillance. Tara sat in the back seat, her eyes fixed on the blinking tracker on the laptop beside her. One of the red dots began moving erratically at first, then steadily, heading east. "Ethan Ward," she murmured. "I can feel it. There's a resonance in my chest, like his presence aligning with mine. He's scared," she added quietly, "but he isn't running from me. He's running toward me." Samantha caught the reflection of their connection in the rearview mirror. "The closer you get, the stronger your link becomes," she observed. Carter, riding shotgun, wasn't too comfortable with that idea. "So what happens when all of them wake up?" he asked. Samantha exhaled slowly. "Then the experiment is live, and nobody knows what that means for any of us." Tara looked down at her steady pocket watch. "I think it's more than just sentimental now," she said softly, "like it was used to time something important." Samantha glanced at the network code scrawled on Tara's DNA report. "That sequence matches part of the signal," she noted. "Maybe your watch is tuned to that beacon." Carter looked between them. "Are you saying you can track them?" "No," Tara replied quietly, "but I can sense them." As the team finalized plans to investigate the nearest subject, the map blinked again. One of the red markers shifted, the location in the snowy forests of Oregon. In a modest home there, a teenage boy named Ethan Ward bolted upright in bed. His nose bled, his breath was shallow, and he glanced at the sky as if hearing a long-forgotten call. Wiping his blood-stained hand, he whispered, "Tara." He didn't know her personally, but somehow he'd always been waiting for her. In Silver Pines, Oregon, a town where memories fade among towering pines and endless snow, Ethan had spent his entire life. Raised by a strict, reclusive man who claimed to be his uncle, Ethan's childhood was shrouded in mystery. Whenever he asked about his parents, he was met with the same answer: they were lost in service. Yet Ethan never fully accepted that explanation. Late at night, voices and visions haunted him. Visions of a strong yet frightened girl with blonde hair and dark eyes appearing in labs or running through white snow. Each morning his hands would tremble, his chest would ache, and his nose would bleed. Eventually he stopped discussing it. The last time he brought it up, his uncle had burned a photograph and whispered, "You weren't made to remember." That phrase lingered in Ethan's mind more than any dream. Then, one morning after his strongest dream yet, he felt something shift. A switch flipped inside him. The girl had softly whispered, "Tara," and when he awoke, the old clock in the hallway, untouched for years, had started ticking once more. He didn't know why, but it frightened him more than the dream. He ventured into the basement, where an old chest, always forbidden, awaited. Something deep inside urged him to open it. Inside were dozens of medical records, files, with his name, some marked with codes like 6A02. One file showed a picture of him as a toddler hooked up to machines. Another detailed his blood under a microscope labeled Helix Adaptive Subject Ward. His hands shook as he realized he wasn't just a normal kid. He had been built, trained, and watched his entire life. And now, the confines that had held him were beginning to crumble. At that moment, he heard the sound of tires on snow. His uncle was home early. Ethan hastily packed the files into his backpack and slipped out the back window, not knowing where he was headed, only that something inside him was calling him eastward, whispering the name Tara like a beacon. Deep down, he believed that she was the one who could finally reveal who he truly was. That night, in a cabin in New Hampshire, Tara sat by the fire, clutching a map with 5 blinking points. One of the markers had just shifted. Her eyes widened as she softly said, "He's awake." Carter looked up from the table where he had been reviewing documents. "Ethan?" he asked. Tara nodded slowly. "He's moving." Samantha joined them from outside, dusted with snow. "We need to find him before they do," she said. "These connections are not by chance. They're built into your blood." As snow fell hard in northern Pennsylvania, the team crossed state lines in a black SUV modified to dodge surveillance. Tara sat in the back, her gaze fixed on the blinking tracker on the laptop next to her. One red dot began moving steadily eastward. "Ethan Ward," she murmured. "I can feel his presence aligning with mine." "He's scared," she added quietly. "But he isn't fleeing from me. He's coming toward me." Samantha caught their reflection in the rearview mirror. "The closer you get, the stronger your connection becomes," she observed. Carter, riding shotgun, frowned. "What happens when all of you are awake?" he asked. Samantha exhaled slowly. "Then, the experiment is truly live, and none of us know what that means." Tara looked down at the ticking pocket watch. "It's more than sentimental now," she said softly. "It feels like it was meant to time something." Samantha looked at the code scribbled on Tara's DNA report. "That sequence is part of the signal," she said. "Maybe your watch is tuned to that beacon." Carter looked between them. "So, you can track them?" "No," Tara replied quietly, "but I can sense their presence." As the team made plans to investigate the nearest subject, the map blinked again. One red marker shifted, located in the snowy forests of Oregon. In a modest home there, a teenage boy named Ethan Ward sat up abruptly, his nose bleeding, his breath shallow. He glanced at the sky as if he'd just heard someone call his name, wiped the blood away with trembling hands and whispered, "Tara." Though he didn't know her, deep inside, he felt she was the one who could tell him who he really was. Later that night, as the team regrouped in a safe house in rural New Hampshire, Carter, Samantha, Tara, and Rex gathered around scattered documents. From Dr. Slate's lab, pages, faded photographs, printed documents, and tapes with cryptic codes were spread out before them. Carter leaned against a doorframe, eyes guarded as he watched Tara sift through the files. Samantha sat at the dining table, scribbling notes to piece together a timeline from the fragments. Then, Tara discovered a folded page hidden in an old manual. No title, no explanation, just a list of names, each marked with 6A. The names glowed against the dim light. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered softly. "But I'm not." Carter stepped closer, peering over her shoulder. There were 5 names, and Tara's name was the last on the list. "These aren't merely files," he said quietly. "They're identities, subjects." Tara pointed to the second name, Ethan Ward. "I've seen him in my dreams, a boy running through the snow. I always assumed it was my imagination." Samantha looked up sharply. "It's not just imagination, it's neurological. You're connected, whether genetically or cognitively. You're even picking up shared memories like an instinctual signal. Tara's voice dropped to a hushed whisper. They didn't just create us, they linked us. Later that night, Samantha decrypted a flash drive found among the papers. A blinking map appeared on the screen, with 5 red markers scattered across the country, each corresponding to one of the names on the list. These aren't just identities, Samantha said. They're locations, dormant subjects likely still unaware. Carter leaned over, and the reflection of the map shone in Tara's eyes. If I get triggered, she murmured, they could all be in danger. Samantha nodded grimly. And when they wake up, they won't know who to trust, which makes them vulnerable or dangerously unpredictable. Tara walked over to a small table where the antique pocket watch from the vault lay. She picked it up, feeling its steady tick in her palm. There's something about this watch, she said softly. Something that keeps appearing in my dreams. I think it was used to time something important. Samantha glanced at the network code scribbled on Tara's DNA report. That sequence matches part of the signal, she observed. Maybe your watch is tuned to that beacon. Carter looked between them. Are you saying you can track them? No, Tara replied quietly, but I can definitely sense them. As the team finalized plans to investigate the next subject, the map blinked again. One of the red markers shifted slightly, a location in the snowy woods of Oregon. In a modest home there, a teenage boy named Ethan Ward suddenly sat upright, his nose bleeding, his breath shallow. He looked at the sky as if someone had called his name, wiped his blood-stained hand and whispered, Tara. Though he didn't know her personally, deep down he felt she was the key to understanding who he was. As the night wore on, Carter, Samantha, Tara, Ethan, and Rex prepared for what was coming next. Carter, Samantha, and Tara gathered in a secure hideout in an abandoned facility nestled in the hills of North Carolina. Though the building appeared deserted, Tara could feel a signal still pulsing within its walls. They all stood at the rusted entrance, knowing that this was it. Deep beneath the facility, the remaining 3 Helix subjects were now awake, no more running or hiding. Together they descended into the cold tunnels in near silence, guided more by instinct than by memory. Inside, they found 3 others, just like Tara and Ethan, individuals who were modified, connected, and marked by a shared understanding. One of them, a young girl, stepped forward and said, "We've seen you in the dark." Ethan nodded, and she continued, "We came to shut it down in the control room." Samantha inserted the final drive into a terminal, which wiped everything clean, every server, every code, and the constant hum that had haunted them for so long. In its place, there was silence, and for the first time, peace. They were no longer assets or subjects. They were simply human. As the sun broke over the trees and the facility crumbled behind them, Ethan turned to Tara. "It's over," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, it's just the beginning. We end what they started, for everyone like us. No more secrets, no more control, only freedom to choose." With that, they drove away, and Tara held the ticking pocket watch in her hand. A soft echo of a voice, her mother's, whispered in her mind, "You weren't made to obey, you were made to choose." As the morning light touched her face, Tara closed her eyes and for the first time truly felt free.